All right, high rollers, our guest today is a stats guy, loves the numbers. He delves into data for fun, and a few years ago when he found the game of darts, he found a gold mine, perhaps the perfect numbers game. Darts suited well for data analytics, and this guy is good at what he does. Statistical analysis for the PDC. He's written articles in publications like Love the Darts magazine, Darts Weekly. We've seen him on the Darts Planet podcast, and he is referenced all the time by the boys in the broadcast booth at all the major darts events around the world. If you're a darts fan, you probably follow him on Twitter at Wikipedia. Chris Kempf is with us today. Chris, welcome to the show, man. Thanks for being our high roller today.
Thanks a lot. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, nice to have you. Let me start with an easy question, or maybe it's a tough one. I don't know. What is the most important statistic in darts? Is it the 3-dart average, or is it the checkout percentage?
Well, honestly, I don't think either of those are really the most important. Honestly, I think that a statistic which encompasses both of those would be more important than either. Because if you look at a 3-dart average and if you look at a checkout percentage, you're only getting really a small portion of the game of 501. Sure, the 3-dart average takes into account all the darts, whereas the checkout percentage doesn't. But one of the things I had done in working for Darts Weekly magazine was to try to come up with an estimate of the number of darts you would expect a player to throw in the long run to win a leg. And even that, I think, was insufficient in the sort of calculating power for coming up with a real measure of a number, sort of a number that gives a player that you can have one number for each player and rank them, and that's sort of the best way to put them in order from best to worst. It's kind of a challenge, and I don't think anyone has solved it yet, although I'm working on it, other people are working on it, and that's the sort of thing that had got me interested in.
Yeah, it really is fascinating. The reason I asked that question is because we hear the phrase in sports all the time, the numbers don't lie. But in darts, I mean, it seems they do sometimes when you see a player win the match and he shot a lower average. I mean, there's certain things in darts that you can't calculate, right? Like who handles pressure better, or can you?
Honestly, I'm of the opinion that if it really comes down to it, everything is measurable. It's just that we haven't figured out a good way to measure it at the moment, or it just takes too much time to measure for most people to think about. In the case of something like pressure, I think that would come out in the length of time a player would take between throwing darts, the sort of decisions he makes as far as segments he throws for. I'm of the opinion that everything is measurable. And when it comes down to it, it's really just a question of what matters. Now, you say that that numbers don't lie, but being in statistics for long enough, you realize how much you can make numbers lie. For instance, I had just researched something last night that showed that Michael Vacherwa is actually one of the worst players in professional darts at hitting big numbers, the biggest targets on the board. And from that, you might infer some things, if you didn't know anything else about MVG, you might infer some things that wouldn't necessarily be true. It's all context, and as a statistician, you have a lot of responsibility to try to portray things in a way that accurately represents how good players are and what their capabilities are. So the numbers themselves don't lie, but if you sort of put them in a context where they're meant to lie, no one can really know the difference.
It's very fascinating stuff. I was going to ask you about the MVG statistical analysis later, but let me bring it up now since you mentioned it. One guy who is pretty consistent, definitely the world number one, right? Michael van Gerwen, the superstar of the game today. But here's the fun stat. He missed his 11th big number of the year in stage matches, which means he has missed 6.2% of the time, and that's in 177 attempts. You went on further to say, which means the average 2018 Euro Tour player is more accurate in hitting big numbers than the world number one. I mean, that's tough to explain, isn't it?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with who MVG is just as a player. When you look at it from the perspective that MVG has won more than 100 titles, he's been the world number one for over 4 years now, you have to feel that he's getting slightly bored, to be honest. And his job as a professional darts player often entails hitting lots of single numbers. I don't really think that interests him, because I think if he really put his mind to it and focused with every single dart, he'd probably hit 99% of big numbers. MVG being sort of at a point in his career where he knows what he can do. He's won the World Championship twice. Hitting a single number in the third round of the fourth Euro Tour event of any given year, I don't think really gets his fire going and gets him excited about it. I mean, you see, and even in the last couple of Euro Tour events, he's going for the 3 bullseye shot. He's going for unusual checkout routes. I think the man is bored, and it kind of shows through in the statistics.
Isn't that interesting? So good that you're bored. I mean, I read somewhere that he recently tried 121 bull, 777 bull. I mean, that's out of the norm. So maybe he is bored. That's incredible.
Well, boredom, I think, is really the only explanation for MVG in one of the final legs of a Euro Tour final with 25,000 pounds on the line, with Peter Wright waiting to throw for a double. MVG is on, I think, 221, and he tries to hit 3 bullseyes. There's no statistical justification for why that would be an acceptable percentage shot for MVG. He just did it because he felt like he might lose the leg anyway, and why not try for 3 bulls?
Now, as a stats guy, when you're watching something like that, MVG board, or perhaps another player trying to climb the ranks with obvious scoring problems, doesn't know what to leave or what to shoot or goes the wrong way, when you're watching that, does that frustrate you?
It doesn't frustrate me that much, because the game of 501, to be honest, comes down much more to skill than strategy. Really, the only significant strategic decision that a player makes has to do with the route you might choose to go for a checkout, or when to throw for the bull. A lot of my research for the PDC has gone into when is it the correct decision to throw for the bull. I don't really think that if a player makes the correct strategic decisions 100% of the time, it's necessarily going to bring him from an average level to a professional level. At a basic level, you just have to be able to hit the treble 20 at a rate of about 35 to 45% to be able to play with the PDC professionals. So I suppose it doesn't really irritate me when people go the wrong way, because they're humans. They're under pressure. They're in a match where they may not necessarily be thinking straight about the correct probabilities or their tendencies in the past. So it's really just a matter of what comes out in the moment. And the more spontaneous players who react well under pressure are really more exciting to watch, but not necessarily better players.
We're talking about MVG. In the Darts Planet podcast that you were on, you said that you got into the game after stumbling across a video of MVG throwing 17 perfect darts. Now, I was watching that match live, immediately tweeted out about that situation. I was absolutely amazed. I mean, it was unbelievable. Why did those 17 perfect darts pique your interest in the game?
I think that throwing a lot of trebles, is sort of the mainstay of the game, but throwing so many of them in a row, having every dart hit its target time after time, and having the crowd whipped even more into a frenzy with each dart, it really gives you a sense of how quickly something in darts can go from mundane to a record-breaking and memorable moment that you'll remember fondly for as long as you're interested in darts. And yes, I talk a lot about MVG, but it's because he's the guy who got me interested in darts. And there's something very exciting about watching him, because, especially because recently he's become bored, and you never know what he's going to do next. And then, of course, there's the fact that if you're an MVG fan, it's like finding a $20 bill on the sidewalk every day of your life, because he just wins all the time. Only another couple weeks, and it's probably more likely than not that he'll have 10 titles on the year just for playing for a couple months.
I mean, it's unbelievable. It's at the point, like Wayne Gretzky in his day, Michael Jordan, he's so good, people start to cheer against him, right? They want to see him lose just because it doesn't happen that often. Now, you're in Massachusetts, Red Sox country. Baseball, a big numbers game. We see all the fantasy sports leagues, gambling sites like DraftKings, and of course the Sharks, who then take up these fantasy sports leagues, these sports bettors who really delve into the numbers because they see it as a chance to make money. How does darts compare with some of the big American sports, football, basketball, baseball, in terms of the analytics? A lot of similarities?
Honestly, there are quite few similarities. Obviously, the basic statistical methods that you use to analyze any sport are going to be similar. But the thing that's remarkable about darts, and what sets it apart from many of the more popular American sports, is that it's uniquely measurable, and a player's results are so directly comparable to another's because they're playing on the same board. And for the most part, one player's behavior doesn't necessarily affect another.
Right.
So that allows you to put together very substantial data for each individual player. And the other thing that's interesting about darts is that if you throw a dart at the treble 20, it's either in the treble 20 or not in the treble 20. So you are getting a very clear percentage of representing a player's accuracy on any given segment that has nothing to do with a defender getting in the way, or the wind outdoors, or the time of day, and whether you're playing on turf or on grass. There are so many figures, there are so many extra factors in a game like baseball, which have really made it just sort of consumed by analysis in the U.S., that darts is actually quite simple to analyze, because a lot of the work that I do for the PDC is just pulling data from events and seeing what the raw percentages are of players hitting doubles and trebles and different three-figure outshots. I think the first thing that got me interested in darts was that you can look at a player's statistics in any respect and compare them to another's, and there's almost nothing getting in the way of saying this player is better than the other because of a particular statistic. They're throwing for the same board. For the most part, the equipment they're throwing, the darts that they're throwing, has very little impact on the player's skill, with the exception of some players who, like Benito Van de Pas, who throws darts that enter the board at a very steep angle and are more prone to bounce outs. The same is true for Justin Pipe, but because they enter at a very shallow angle, it gives you the same result. But when you look at a sport like baseball, the complexity of all the different factors, and the fact that it's played on a field which doesn't have any, that's not sort of divided off cleanly. If a shortstop covers for a second baseman, there's nothing saying that he can't do that, but that sort of flexibility makes it difficult to quantify how good at defense he is. Obviously, there are people with much more statistical know-how than myself who have already delved deeply into this question and come up with good answers. But as for darts, I think I saw that there was really an opportunity get deep into putting together a lot of data over a long period of time, and that would have a clear and significant impact on, how you could compare them in a statistical way and have it really mean something.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing. And in darts, all of that you just said suggests it's more of a mind game. I've always wondered, people throw 180s, but they can't throw the amount of 180s in the back-to-back 180s like MVG. But if you can throw a 180 on any given visit to the dartboard, it makes you wonder why you can't do it all the time, right? It suggests that it's about consistency and it's about your mental state. Can you stay focused? Can you stay consistent?
Right. Just the fact of having one or two darts on the board already makes you nervous, myself included. I play a little bit of darts. I've hit a few 180s. I can't count the number of times I've had two treble 20s and thrown a dart so far away into the single one that it made me wonder how I got the first two in the treble in the first place.
So the bottom line is things like that, where your heart rate goes up going for that third dart 180. Over time, with all the statistical analysis, you really can pinpoint why certain players are better than others. I mean, it's all there in the numbers if you know how to analyze it.
Well, as for the psychology of the game, it's something that, as I say, everything is quantifiable and should be quantifiable, but it's difficult to get inside the head of a player and find out why they behave in particular ways. That they behave in particular ways is something that you can figure out with enough statistical analysis, but learning why is I think, the more interesting question.
Yeah, very interesting. Now, I was down your Twitter page. I found a compilation. You ranked the top 64 players on their combined 3-dart average for the month of March. Showed some interesting findings, interesting names at the top, too, for the most improved over the past 30 days. Alan Taburn was there. Steve Lennon, the Irishman, who seems like he's about to break through at any minute, in my opinion. I mean, he seems like he's good mentally, no problem with the checkouts, and he's always there or thereabouts around the treble 20, and I think he's going to break through soon.
Well, he's broken through to the second round of the German Open, so that's not a bad start.
Yeah, he's got a big match tomorrow with Bully Boy, I believe, so that's going to be interesting. Now, speaking of that, see, Bully Boy is a guy with all the natural talent in the world, but when I watch him, I just feel that in the big match somewhere along the line he's going to slip up.
Well, and that's the sort of thing that only playing in many big matches can really accustom you to.
Right.
For MVG, there was a period of about 4 years from 2008 to 2012 where I think the pressure got the better of him quite a bit, and he would lose matches that the statistics and his ability would indicate that he shouldn't. I think that being in the Premier League for the second time is a great thing for Michael Smith. Being up in front of a crowd of thousands every week is, I think, going to steel his resolve and make him more accustomed to the demands of playing in that kind of environment. So I think we're not too far away from seeing Michael Smith have a bit of a breakthrough moment, but there are any number of players who we've been looking for a breakthrough moment for quite a while now, and it's just a question of when it happens.
Well, I want to clarify. I mean, that's the feeling I've had over the past few years with respect to Michael Smith. But I also think this year he's maturing. He seems like he's got more confidence. He's more professional. A couple of wins already. And, of course, those performances in the Premier League. So you're right. I think at any time he could come through and win a major and maybe even the World Championship. Talking about breakthroughs, Rob Cross, a lot of talk about him and what he did over the past year and that amazing performance and run at the World Title Championship at the Ali Pali. I mean, that really was amazing, and that's what I appreciate about darts. You put the work in, you go on a run, and if you really there's so much money out there, right? These guys are practicing nonstop. It's there if you want it, and Rob Cross really reached out and took it last year.
He certainly did, and being an MVG fan from the moment I got interested in darts, watching MVG lose that match just broke my heart. But I give full credit to Rob Cross because I don't think there's anyone who watched Rob Cross start out in the year thinking this is going to be not a world champion in the future. He is the next world champion. And just about every statistical ranking and analysis I produced suggests that even though he's ranked number 3 in the world, he is the number 2 player in the world. He is producing the second highest average of any player on the planet. He is, regularly getting to a point where MVG and Peter Wright and Gary Anderson really have something to worry about every time they play the guy. And it's just incredible to think that this guy was an amateur 2 years ago at the UK Open when we first even knew the guy existed. And now he's the world champion, and everybody knows who he is.
And I definitely think that there's going to be more clashes and big moments with MVG down the line.
Watching MVG play Rob Cross was, in 2017, the marquee matchup. I mean, you could not ask for a more interesting and exciting and high performance level of a match. And I think that's going to continue to be the case in 2018.
I know you play darts. You mentioned it. You're getting better all the time. I want to talk about the standard at last year's World Championship. You're in the States. I'm in Canada. Of course, darts is massive across Europe and in the UK. I try to describe to people a great match like that Rob Cross MVG one. You got to watch it, I say. I don't really know how to describe it, but when they're both flowing like that, they're both hitting the treble 20 with reckless abandon. I mean, relentless. How would you describe it? It's electrifying, isn't it?
Right, and throwing it at that sort of speed, to me, it's kind of like watching rowing with a boxing crowd. Because the rhythm that players can get into, once they've been playing for, especially in the World Championships, they've been playing for more than an hour, and they continue to pump out darts at the same speed with the same quality. It takes a lot of endurance to play like that, and obviously a lot of the appeal of darts in the past decade or two, now that the PDC has really built this up into what it is now, the impact of the crowd just, I think, encourages the players to produce what they produce so often. And I think that's largely due to a player like Eric Bristow, who is sadly no longer with us, but a man who showed what confidence and ability can do for you, and the guy who could build the sport of darts almost on his back.
It's really interesting if we could only quantify self-belief in terms of the average. I mean, how many more points would Eric Bristow have an advantage on every other player when he stepped to the hockey? That guy was ultimate cocky. Same with Conor McGregor in the UFC. I mean, what a run he had. He just sort of came in, said he was going to do it, had the self-belief, and did it. In sports, they call it finding the zone. But I heard Rob Cross describe it as he goes into a bubble. And if you could only bottle that, right, you'd be a rich, rich man, because and it's going to happen down the line again, maybe at the World Championship, you get Rob Cross versus MVG, they both go into that bubble, and we're just going to be on the edge of our seats. I mean, if you could just bottle that stuff, right, we'd all be rich.
We'd all be rich, and there'd be a lot more, I think a lot of aspiring professional darts players would be lining up to buy some of that.
No kidding, eh? All right, I got one more question from your Twitter feed. Some fun facts about last weekend's Players' Championship 8. Mickey Mantle, I mean, that was a real shock. And it goes to my earlier point that if you want it, if you stay with it, if you put the practice time in, anything can happen on any given Sunday, right? Also, Josh Payne made the semifinals, and you tweeted these two things. In his 53-leg campaign on Sunday, Mickey Mantle hit 52 140s and 52 tons. Very nearly one of each for every leg he played. That's amazing. Then you tweeted 97.90 average for Josh Payne over his last 56 legs between PC7 and PC8. I mean, that's fun stuff. Those are fun stats. When I see that, I got to hit the retweet button.
Well, I appreciate that you do, and that, we can only, looking at a stat like that, makes you wonder how amateurs like like myself and like so many others can ever achieve that sort of thing. But the real genius of Mickey Mantle's win in the Players' Championship was that he won almost every leg he played in that tournament. And he wasn't doing it by producing Phil Taylor level darts or MVG level darts. It was, just putting in a 140, a 100, a 180 in every leg and every match. And I think a lot of players were sort of prone to underestimate Mickey Mantle, being a player who hadn't reached a quarterfinal in 4 years. And I think a lot of players who did underestimate him really paid the price for it.
Yeah, no kidding. He put on a show. He topped some big names, and really, really well done. Nice to see. I mean, I know you don't get tired of MVG winning, but when it's MVG, Gary Anderson, MVG, come on. Mickey Mantle one time, baby. I can't let you go, Chris, without talking about poker. I know you're a fan. I do a lot of poker on the website. That's a great game. That's a great numbers game, too, isn't it? There's a lot of psychology in poker, just like darts.
Yeah, the similarities are kind of interesting. Obviously, there's a lot more randomness involved in poker, but having been interested in poker for as long as I have, there was one point in time where I tried to do the same sort of statistical analysis for poker that I'm doing for darts right now. And it's obviously a much different, a very different beast. But as for poker, I can look back on some hands of poker that I've seen on TV or that I've played myself and think, that's one of the most interesting and exciting things I've ever done. I love it, and if only I had the sort of bankroll to really get as interested in poker as I want to be, then I'd be a happy man, but I can only dream.
Well, listen, I came to learn about you watching the darts at PDC.TV. They mentioned your name. They provided the stats you put out there, and I heard the name, Wikipedia, and I went, wow, that is such a great handle. And for a stats guy, I mean, you just nailed it with your Twitter handle, man.
Well, I was really surprised when I came up with that no one had done it before. I thought it's too obvious. How could someone not use that Twitter name? And luckily, I just got there at the right point in time.
Wikipedia, Chris Kempf, our guest today. Thank you so much, Chris. I really appreciate it. It means a lot to me, as you know. Thank you.
It's been a pleasure, Derek. Thanks a lot.